Welcome back, and thank you once again for joining us. The big question, should fathers who don't pay for child support or who are not involved in their children's lives be named and shamed publicly? Well, the Facebook page Izinja Ezingondliyo, translated Dogs That Don't Pay Maintenance, was recently launched, and it is growing in popularity. It's well over 100,000 likes on Facebook's there. It's reached just over, like I mentioned, the numbers there are astronomical. The last time I checked, and this was on Friday, it was about 80,000, but sources are telling me now that it's exceeded 100,000. So, but basically, we're talking about whether or not this page and others like it are a form of empowerment or are defamatory. With us in studio this morning, Megan Harrington-Johnson, attorney at Schindlers Attorney, as well as single dad Paul Mulder. Thank you very much for joining us. I think this is something that's quite important. Megs, let's perhaps start with you. I think there's a thin line between freedom of expression and empowerment, and then on the other side, defamation of character. Does this Facebook page, naming and shaming, cross the line?
It absolutely does. I would be very careful to post anything on that sort of a forum. There needs to be a law in place to try and regulate whether or not people are going to be named and shamed, because from what I could see on the page, absolutely anything and everything was being said about these dads, and it's not necessarily true. And you need to remember that anything that is published that is not in the public interest and that is not true or proven by a court is defamatory. I know that there are some states in the US where they have decided to publish the names of fathers who have been convicted of not paying maintenance. And you must remember that this is a very, very distinct line. Conviction versus someone complaining about it. Sure. So that would be akin to something like a sexual offenders register, where the names of those people are placed on a government register, but not in a public forum like Facebook. It is a very, very dangerous thing to go and start bandying about names in a public forum like that.
So the dads, deadbeat or not, have grounds for recourse in this case?
Absolutely. They can interdict the mothers or the posters or the page itself from posting these sort of defamatory contents, and they can also sue for defamation.
Yeah. And what about the mums? Because, they must be frustrated. I can just imagine what it's like to be hounding someone day in, day out, asking for money for nappies, school fees, you name it. I mean, it takes two to tango, but they are now the ones who are, burdened with the responsibility. What sort of action should they be taking? What recourse is there? I mean, some of them are saying we're at our wits' end. Facebook is our only option.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can understand the frustration, and I deal with it on a daily basis with clients of mine, and we obviously have to deal with the correct procedures, and there are correct procedures that are in place. There is recourse to the maintenance courts. There's maintenance courts all over the country. Yeah. Unfortunately, the process is slow, but the correct thing to do is to approach the court, make a complaint. An inquiry will be done, and ultimately there could be a garnishee order placed on a non-paying dad's salary.
Mm. And what about those who say the laws of justice, the wheels of justice just grind way too slowly? I mean, we're looking at some of the posts. You can see them, they're behind us, but we're going to be showing them throughout the course of this conversation of what people have had to say. One of them speaking out against a pastor who says, listen, you haven't seen your son in 11 years. You can't expect this child to fast, and calling on the congregants to say, where's your tithe and offering going, etc. Dads have retaliated as well. They've started their own Facebook page saying, this child doesn't even look like me. I don't even know whether or not I can claim paternity. Others are saying, well, I'm not paying maintenance because you are denying me access to the child. I mean, the list is endless. So let's talk a little bit about, those who say we can't take the legal route because it takes far too long.
Look, the wheels of justice do turn very, very slowly. And if anyone knows that, it's myself and our guest Paul that's in the studio with us, who will be telling us his story just now. But you cannot take the law into your own hands. It results in mob justice and is extremely dangerous. Can you imagine we took the law into our own hands in terms of people or accused of robbery or murder, etc., like sometimes happens, and things get completely out. Vigilante justice, exactly, and that's exactly what's happening with this, unfortunately. Yeah. Look, it is a horrific situation to be in. You mentioned moms complaining that, or fathers complaining that they're not going to pay maintenance if they don't see their child, but that's contrary to the law. Unfortunately, the law says that if you are obliged to pay maintenance, or if you actually are the child's father, you have a duty and a responsibility, and even if you're not being afforded contact, you have to pay maintenance. You cannot offset maintenance just because you're not being allowed to see the child.
I think that's a perfect point to bring in Paul, because his story, I think, is extremely heart-wrenching. He ticks all the boxes. He's paying the maintenance. He's making efforts to try and have contact with the child, but has been denied. Paul, maybe take us to the beginning and tell us a little bit about your ordeal and where you are now.
Sure. I think I'd like to go back just to where probably the real problem started with contact around my child. It's been a very long ordeal for me. My child today is 3 years and 9 months old, so he's a wonderful little boy. But I started the process of trying to confirm my rights and responsibilities via the court process, because the contact I was being afforded with my child was certainly not in his best interests. I think important with all of these things is to maintain the child's best interest.
Always.
And I began the process of engaging a legal team to start this, and during the course of that process, my son's mom informed us that she had received a job offer from Microsoft in Bulgaria, and she was seriously considering it, and in fact she was going to take it. And she launched an urgent High Court application to relocate with my son from the country, which of course I opposed. The court ruled that this application was not urgent. It should be struck from the roll and put on the normal roll, so I managed to buy some time there. And during the course of moving along after this, she brought another application to holiday in Bulgaria, which once again I opposed on the basis that we suspected that my child would not be brought back to the country. And the High Court ruled in my favour, and I was afforded the opportunity not to attend an embassy to get a passport for him, and it was viewed, or it was the order of the court was that he should not take the holiday overseas. And moving along, I then had together with my son's mom, we had a forensic assessor appointed in order to determine what are the best interests of the child and how a parenting agreement should look, and whether a trip overseas, or in fact not a trip, relocating with a child was in the child's best interest. This forensic assessor, who's an expert in the industry and ostensibly one of the top experts in the industry, ruled that it was not in the child's best interest to relocate out of the country. And also he made some recommendations around what the parenting agreement or the contact agreement should look like. We approached the High Court to have these recommendations implemented, and 2 days prior to this High Court application, we found out that my son's mom had illegally removed him from the country. She had
Your son was abducted.
He was abducted.
It's illegal.
She abducted him from the country. She fraudulently acquired him a passport, so she went to the embassy and said that she had an affidavit from the father. I had never presented such an affidavit, so that must have been acquired fraudulently.
It's forgery.
That's forgery. The charges which will be in place relate to that. There's a warrant for her arrest out. But be that as it may, she is now in a foreign country with my child. She's been there for the better part of 4 months. The abduction took place on the 9th of July. We have engaged our central authority to implement what you call a Hague application. A Hague application is a legal framework to have the child returned to their country of habitual residence. And so we're in that process at the moment. The difficulty, and I think what aligns very well with this Facebook website, is one of the defences that a mother would have in a scenario like this is that the environment is unsafe for the child. So I'm facing a number of accusations which are completely baseless around abuse of the child and the mother and so forth. And so I sit here fighting these legal battles. Since my child was abducted, I've had no contact with him whatsoever. I continue to pay maintenance. We were not informed where the child is. We did manage to subpoena some information from her employer to find out where she was. But effectively, my rights of access to my child have been curtailed completely. And it's a very tough and sad scenario.
You know, Paul, I can see that you are being very strong and you're holding it together, but I'd imagine that this is a worst nightmare scenario for you. It sounds to me like it's taking an incredible toll, not only on you personally, emotionally. I mean, I'd imagine relationships put on hold, work constraints now going up and down to all the legal proceedings, but also it sounds like such an expensive exercise, you know, to get you mentioned your forensic assessor and all of that. And I can't help but wonder that for ordinary Joe Soap somewhere in the corner corner of South Africa to go through this is near impossible.
Absolutely right. One of the benefits I do have is that I'm self-employed because the amount of time that I've had to devote to this is essentially a full-time job. So unfortunately, I've taken a tremendous knock in that sense. And then, of course, your bills mount as well. You need to engage very expensive lawyers when you go to a high court. The forensic assessor is in excess of 100,000 rand. So my bills now honestly sit over R1 million in terms of various legal engagements, various professionals I've engaged in order to help with this. So it's, by and large, is out of reach for the average South African. It's an extremely difficult exercise to go through. And, when you think it needs to be done in the child's best interests at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself the question as to whether an average parent has the means to be able to do what is in the child's best interests all the time.
Yeah. This tug of war over children, Megs, is it something that's far too common in South Africa?
Oh, far too common. I see probably 5 or 6 cases a week where there's a complete breakdown in communication between parents, and people become very selfish and very emotional when it comes to their kids. And that's why we generally tend to get external assessors appointed, because they tend to take the emotion out of the situation. And normally I see when you have someone that's very well respected come in and do some sort of a clinical assessment or forensic report to make a recommendation as to what's in the child's best interests, the parents tend to come to their senses and realize that, you know what, this is actually what we need to be doing in the best interests of our children. Unfortunately, in this situation, it didn't occur, and I think, in fact, probably pushed the decision for her to abduct the child, because she was facing insurmountable evidence that the child should be here and in fact should be spending even more time with Paul than what he was getting at the time. So yes, it's very, very far-fetched. So it's not just maintenance, it's not just contact. These things are extremely complicated, and yes, most generally are out of the reach of the normal South African in terms of employing the correct counsel that can deal with these sort of matters.
You know, the Department of Home Affairs, I remember under Minister Malusi Kigaba at the time, introduced stringent legislation about how and when and under what circumstances children can travel, the unabridged birth certificates, affidavits, you name it. I mean, we all complained and we looked back and we're like, oh my goodness, this is just so excessive, etc. Do you think there was some merit to that? And if so, how could it have been breached in this case?
Yeah, very interestingly, I mean, when those laws were passed, I think I was the only person I'm aware of who was smiling at them, because I felt it afforded me some comfort for this pending abduction, which I had a sense was going to happen. Unfortunately, it would seem that fraud happens, corruption happens, and for people who have the resources to be able to effect this fraud and corruption, it is possible for them to circumvent these laws. And in my situation, this appears to be what's happened.
Yeah, and very quickly, just in your answer there, maybe a way forward, taking a look at these websites, because I have a feeling that this is not going to stop. People are taking to social media, etc., to voice out their concerns and grievances. Touching on the issue of legislation, perhaps even a way forward on what to do when it comes to social media platforms that name and shame.
Sure. I think all it's going to take is one case of somebody suing someone for defamation, and then people are going to stop doing what they're doing, because it's an extremely serious offence, and you can get hit for very, very many hundreds of thousands of rand if you damage someone's reputation to that extent. But yes, our courts do need to function better so that it can get to a point where it doesn't have to go that far.
All right, let's leave it there. This is a discussion that I think is developing, and we would really love feedback on how things proceed for you. So please do get in touch with us a little bit later. I hope, obviously, that it works out, because I think every single child needs a dad in their life, and a mom, of course, and of course putting the child's needs first. Well, that was our conversation. Our talking point was much ado about deadbeat dads and how, whether or not naming and shaming is the right thing to do, but also balancing it with a perspective on what dads do to try and look out for their children, and how sometimes it doesn't work out. We'll leave it there for the time being. My guests were Megan Harrington-Johnson, attorney at Schindlers Attorneys, as well as single dad Paul Mulder. Quick ad break. Newspapers after this.